You may be approaching retirement or currently in retirement and wondering when is the right time for me to add my children's names, my adult children's names, to my investment accounts. The reason why you might be asking this question is because you might want to facilitate a smooth transfer of your assets to your children when you're no longer either capable to manage your own affairs or when you're no longer here. This question came up from a client that I was sitting with last week. And when I started asking more questions about what they intended, this was their big fear, was that they want to make sure that, they don't expose themselves to any undue income taxes or taxes, estate taxes, and they want to make sure that that process is smooth for their kids. But I highlighted to them that there are several significant risks when adding adult children to investment accounts. And so in this video, I want to highlight what some of those risks are, and then provide you with some alternatives if you do want to facilitate the smooth transfer of your assets to your children when you're no longer either capable to manage your affairs or when you're no longer here. But before I get to that, if we haven't met yet, my name is Mark Walhout. I run an investment and financial planning firm called Walhout Financial. I work with people who are planning for retirement or who are currently in retirement. So if you want to get more videos like these, consider subscribing to the channel. I post a video about once per week with a question that someone's asked me about retirement planning or a topic that I think should be important for people who are thinking about retirement. So let's start with some of the risks that come along with adding adult children to investment accounts. And then we'll go on to different things that you can consider. So the first big risk to adding an adult child, or anyone for that matter, to an account that you own on your own is the potential that you might lose control of that asset. If you bring somebody else on as a co-owner of an investment, if you want to sell that investment down the road to raise cash for living expenses, for example, you now need to get somebody else to sign off. And while you might believe that that's not going to be an issue, you don't know what circumstances might arise down the road. So that might create some issues that you may want to avoid. The second big issue is potential tax consequences. So if you want to add an adult child to a non-registered investment, like a taxable investment account that you've put money into, and that investment has now grown and you have what's called unrealized gains in that account, by adding that adult child to that account, you may spin up some immediate tax consequences that you may not want to have. When you bring somebody on as a co-owner, it's like you sold half that investment and now you've brought on a co-owner. That might spin up some taxes, and you want to avoid that if it's not a good time for you to realize those taxes. The next big one is legal consequences. So let's say you bring an adult child onto an investment account or an asset as a co-owner, and they get into some kind of a legal issue. Let's say that they run a business and that business runs into financial difficulties. That asset may now be open to creditors of your adult child, and they may come after that asset to settle any outstanding debts that your adult child may have. Or another common situation, and it's a sad situation, but oftentimes marriages end in divorce. So if your adult child gets into a situation where their marriage is ending, that account, if you've brought them on as a joint owner, may be exposed to a claim from the ex-spouse if it's part of that child's property or deemed to be part of that child's property. So we want to avoid the legal consequences of adding an adult child to an account or an asset. And then finally, potential estate issues. Now, in the circumstance of the client that I was sitting with, they have 3 children. And so let's say they wanted to add one child to an investment account. The children all get along today, but down the road when mom and dad are no longer here, what if that one child who was added to the account says, no, this account's not part of the estate. This is my property with mom and dad. That may not be your intention. Your intention might be that all of your assets get distributed amongst all your children equally. But if you add one child to that account, it just raises a whole bunch of issues that could potentially bubble up because you've now added that one child and maybe not add the other. So there's estate planning issues here that we need to be careful of. So those are the really big risks. Now, if you do want to facilitate the transfer of money or assets to your children, either when you're no longer capable or no longer here are some things that you can consider, which are much more, what I would say, sensible. So the first one that I would consider is using beneficiary designations. So certain types of accounts in Canada have what's called a beneficiary designation, or have the ability to add a beneficiary to it. So I'm thinking of accounts like RRSPs, RRIF, which is a RIF, registered retirement income fund. And that's sort of the income phase of an RSP. Tax-free savings accounts, you can name a beneficiary. Segregated funds, you can name a beneficiary. Those are insurance-specific investments. And the thing that a beneficiary designation does is it facilitates the transfer of those accounts to the beneficiaries that you name when you're no longer here. It bypasses your estate, so you don't have to go through the estate process, and it gets paid to your beneficiaries usually within about 30 days of the proper forms being filed with the investment firm. So why is this important? It's because it's a built-in feature in certain types of accounts in Canada that allow you to facilitate that smooth transfer, that clear transfer, without having any of these other risks that I just spoke about. So that's one thing. So if you have accounts that fall into that category, that's just sort of low-hanging fruit. Now, for most people, they name their spouse as beneficiary or the successor in certain cases to those accounts. I'm thinking of a situation where one spouse is either no longer here, or if you're a single person and you have children, you can name beneficiaries, and that should help you facilitate that smooth transfer. The second one is give sooner. And this is so obvious when I bring it up to people that ask me these questions about, like, is there a way that I can, arrange my affairs so that I can bypass or get around probate and not have to worry about it, and avoid conflict and all this stuff? And my answer is, well, just why don't you give it to them while you're still here? And the great thing about giving while you're alive is that there's very clear communication of who the gift is for, why it's being given. If there is a discrepancy between the gift given to one child and another child, you could explain that discrepancy while you're still here. You avoid some of the conflict that might arise if that whole situation is being handled and you're no longer here to help kind of talk about it. So giving while you're alive is great. Now, giving while you're alive, of course, comes with its own risks. Like, you want to make sure that you have enough to manage your own life and pay your own bills. Once a gift is given, it's hard to ungift that gift. But giving while you're alive is a great way to avoid some of the risks that I'm talking about. The next thing to consider is keeping an up-to-date will and powers of attorney. So these are the documents that are meant to speak for you when you can no longer speak for yourself. Obviously, a will is here to speak for you when you're no longer here. But powers of attorney, the documents that give powers to someone that you name to manage your financial affairs and help you with your health questions and health affairs when you're no longer capable. These are really the documents that are meant to speak for you when you can no longer speak for yourself. So one of the best ways to help facilitate that smooth transfer that we're talking about is just to make sure that those documents are up to date and they reflect your wishes. And then finally, this one, again, is simple, but it's so rarely done well in my experience. It's clear communication. So if you want to facilitate the smooth transfer and avoid some of these risks, there's some steps here that I've outlined, but also the big one that's almost like the overarching principle or overarching piece of advice is just have clear communication with your spouse, with the people that you've named in your will and powers of attorney that are there to help you with your affairs when you can no longer manage them yourselves. If there's going to be discrepancies between how you give things to certain children that is different than what you might be given to other children, as hard as it might be to have that communication, it's best to do that yourself while you're here and deal with it versus having it be dealt with when you're no longer here. And sadly, I have seen situations in my time working as an advisor where the communication wasn't there. Expectations that were set from certain children were different than what actual reality was when things were sort of distributed after mom and dad were no longer here. And those situations are incredibly painful, and siblings that no longer speak to each other. It's very, very sad. So my overarching theme here would be, avoid the risks of adding named our kids to joint ownership, but do some of the things I've talked about, and also make sure that you're communicating clearly to all the people, your loved ones that are going to be impacted by these decisions down the road. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you want to see more videos around retirement planning, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, leave questions and comments below. As I said, I post about one video per week, and it's either a response to a question that I get during client meetings, usually questions are about estate planning, about tax planning, about investment management for people who are preparing for retirement, getting ready to retire. So if you want to get more videos like these, consider subscribing to the channel. And it's been nice speaking with you, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. Take care.